Welcome to Studio with your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we've discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great lay Dominican chapter and co-host of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda,
Ryan Buller,
Ted Broussard.
and today, Ted, you were really interested in bringing the topic of Our Lady of Guadeloupe into the studio. It's something that, of course, our devotion to the Blessed Mother in the Dominican order is well known, right? So this is in our Blessed Mother. I just love the idea that she's come in to different peoples of the world as those peoples, right? She's shown herself a mother to all peoples. And I just think here's another example of her coming to the people, the indigenous people of Guadeloupe, yes, in a recognizable form.
Yes. And I might point out first that Our Lady of Guadeloupe is the patroness of the Americas. So that includes South America, Mesoamerica as it's called, where she appeared, and North America and Canada, of course, North American continent and South American continent. Bishop Burke last year led, I think it was a 9-month novena to Our Lady of Guadeloupe. And it's something I think we should keep in mind, because if you're praying for your country, you're praying for people in that part of the world, it's not a bad idea to pray to Our Lady of Guadeloupe. But my talk today is not particularly about the apparition. My talk is about a book called Guadeloupe and the Flower World Prophecy. The subtitle is How God Prepared the Americas for Conversion Before the Lady Appeared. It's a book that was written by Joseph and his wife Monique Gonzalez. Joseph and Monique Gonzalez. And again, the book is Guadeloupe and the Flower World Prophecy. The first 5 or 6 chapters of the book, I think there are a total of 8 chapters, have everything to do with this Flower World Prophecy, which you're going to see here. I'll explain. It was part of pagan culture in Mesoamerican cultures. And the concept of Flower World has ancient roots, and they trace back to the earliest civilizations in the region, including the Olmecs. Now, if you've ever had an interest in Aztecs, Mayans,
Incas,
and the Incas, the Olmecs, I think, may be one of the most recent discoveries in that part of the world, and you might recognize the evidence that they first found with these large stone heads that were sitting in the ground, like, with no body. I believe, though, that with excavation they found that there are bodies down in the earth below the heads, but the heads have a particular features that some people thought there might have been an African connection, but they don't have any evidence other than the imagery or the features from the heads. There's a possibility that they may be Polynesian. The Polynesians were known to be in the area, in the Pacific, of course, and they traveled unbelievable distances. So those same features could be attributed to Polynesians, but I don't think they've made a definitive determination there. But the flower world represented a paradise realm that was filled with flowers, birds, and music, often associated with the afterlife and spiritual renewal. The Olmecs, O-L-M-E-C-S, are often regarded as the mother culture of Mesoamerica. That would be South America, Mexico, Central America, those areas. And they thrived from about 1400 to 400 BC. Their cultures reference a flower world, but not explicitly. it showed up in some of their iconography and religious practices. The Olmecs placed significant emphasis on nature and fertility, and that can be seen in their use of jade, a material often associated with water and vegetation, and their depictions of maize, which is corn, and other plant life, which symbolize growth and life. The earthly and the spiritual later occurs in cultures, could be conceptualized as moving into a quote-unquote flower world type of paradise. In the Olmec culture, they have artistic motifs and sculptures that I mentioned, and they used elements like the maize god, the god of corn, and other vegetation deities, which symbolize fertility and the earth's bounty. The themes can be seen as precursors to the more developed flower world concepts found in later cultures. Now, it developed, as I said, later on in Mesoamerican cultures. It became more explicit and detailed. For instance, in the Mayan civilization, in their mythology and ritual, the flower world becomes more defined, with the Mayan elites using flowers in courtly rituals to communicate with their ancestors and gods. The concept is evident in their art, poetry, and music, which often depict and describe a lush, vibrant world filled with floral beauty and celestial music. Now, as we move forward with the talk, you're going to understand the elements of this that were included in the apparition of Our Lady of Guadeloupe.
Much like in the Egyptian plagues, right? Which also eventually they showed that these gods were false because of that. Now, I'm sure it's a different way, but the concept is similar where, you had the plagues of Egypt, and those, each one sort of showed that there's only one God, and he made all those, all those things. So yes. I think that's where you're going to go. I don't want to have a spoiler alert, but
no spoiler alert. But you're going to actually see that there are even things that pointed even more toward the coming of Christ, for instance.
Right.
The plagues showed that we had one very powerful God, and the other gods accounted for nothing.
Right.
But there are other prophecies that pointed to Christ. And you're going to see how that makes the connection here with the flower world prophecy.
Okay.
And
well, I'm on the edge of my seat. Go ahead.
Now, for the Aztecs, so we had the Mayan and Aztec cultures that I think they were kind of coming along in tandem with one another. I'm not sure exactly about, when one died out and the other did not, or was continuing to survive. But for the Aztecs, the flower world prophecy also had a significant spiritual implication. It was associated with paradise, the paradise of the god of rain, where the souls of those who died from water-related deaths, like drowning or diseases caused by water, would go. The paradise was depicted as a land abundant with flowers, crops, and joy. So you kind of get the idea of how the Olmecs, the mother culture of Mesoamerica, came up with the basic idea of a very basic idea of the flower world. And then as time moved forward, these other civilizations developed that idea. Even in the American Southwest, among the indigenous peoples such as the Hopi and the Zuni, the flower world appears in ceremonial context, poetry and song, symbolizing a place of ancestral origin and spiritual power. And by the way, the Hopi, I just want to mention this, I believe that their reservation is on the west end of the Grand Canyon, which we traveled to a couple of years ago. And you may know that there's something called a skywalk. And I got to walk on that thing. It was I'm afraid of heights, but I did go there and I experienced that. But the Hopi Indians are the ones that actually have that, own it, and they run it. So in summary, while the Olmecs might not have explicitly conceptualized the flower world as described in later Mesoamerican theology, their religious and cultural practices laid the groundwork for this, and similar notions that would become more explicit in the religious and artistic expressions of their successors. Now, moving forward in time, I'm going to mention first that Cortez, the conquistador, came into Mexico, actually. They came into the Gulf of Mexico, and they landed on the Mexican coast, and they began to interact with Aztec cultures, small villages. And in some cases, they were treated like enemies, invading aliens, and they were shot up with arrows. Kind of an interesting note, the arrows weren't designed to kill. They were designed to wound so that they could take these people into their village and sacrifice them. And they wanted a living being to do that. But what's interesting, too, is those villages were often invaded by the people who were under the rule of Montezuma. And he lived in a huge city called Tenochtitlan in Mexico, which I believe is where Mexico City is. The hill where the apparition occurred is near there.
Yeah.
Tepeyac. Tepeyac is the hill, and there is a shrine there to Our Lady of Guadeloupe. So, as Cortez and the conquistadors came into that area of the world, they were accompanied in some cases by Dominicans, and in maybe all cases with Franciscans, whose aim it was to convert the indigenous people. So the Franciscans in particular came in. They arrived in the Americas following the Spanish conquest. They landed in the New World as part of the broader Spanish colonial and evangelization efforts. The first group of Franciscan friars arrived in the Americas in 1524. Now, the Aztecs had arrived just before then. Just a few years, in fact, 1524 was just a few years after Hernan Cortez completed the conquest of the Aztec Empire. There's a lot of criticism about, the Spanish coming in and destroying those great empires, which certainly had some very impressive things. They built pyramids, not like the Egyptian pyramids, but nevertheless, fantastic construction and organization. When Cortez and his men entered the city of Tenochtitlan, where Montezuma, the king, resided, they were absolutely amazed with the marketplace in particular. These men had grown up and seen huge markets in Europe, and this market was not like nothing they'd ever seen. And they were very impressed with all of that. But of course, these tribes that I mentioned that they had come across feared Montezuma because of this human sacrifice, and they would take people from their villages and sacrifice them. They would capture the women and the children as well and bring them into the city, and mostly I believe they sacrificed the adult males, but I think there was some child sacrifice there too, and the women might have actually been put into prostitution when that happened. So Cortez's arrival marked the beginning of a significant missionary effort aimed at converting the indigenous populations to Christianity. The effort was part of the broader Spanish strategy to integrate the New World territories into the Spanish Empire, both politically and spiritually. But the Franciscans had a problem. They did not have very much success in converting the indigenous populations, and it can be attributed to several factors. The cultural and religious differences. Those indigenous people of the Americas had complex and deeply rooted religious systems, which, with rich cosmologies and spiritual practices that were very different from Christian tradition. The Franciscans, arriving with the intent to convert, often found that the indigenous religions included a pantheon of gods, many gods, ritual sacrifices, and of course, those sacrifices including human sacrifice, and ceremonial practices that were initially difficult to understand and integrate into with Christian doctrine. It was actually opposing Christian doctrine. You can imagine, they're sacrificing humans, and Christianity saw that as you don't want to do that. I mean, that is murder, right?
Just to take note, I mean, we're made in the image and likeness of God, and this is revolutionary for all of the Bronze Age beliefs, because in most other beliefs, like the Egyptians as well as the Mesoamerican cultures, as well as the Babylonian cultures, everything else was a god but the human, right? So we sadly would walk out into a world where we were the only thing not important. And then here comes along, the truth, that we are made in the image and likeness of God. God created all this other stuff for us, and we are to be fulfilled in our understanding of who we are in Christ Jesus.
Well, I might add that Cortez had a relatively small group of conquistadors, and they came into that city. They met Montezuma. Montezuma was very kind to them and allowed them to stay and put them up in his palace area, at least. And then the war broke out, which is a complicated story. I'm not going to get into detail, but in spite of the fact that the surrounding small villages were part of the Aztec Empire and they themselves participated in human sacrifice, Cortez alone with his conquistadors could not have won out, except that he was able to recruit 40,000 warriors from those surrounding tribes. And it was with their help that they were able to defeat and take down the Aztec Empire. But in spite of that, the Franciscans are still having trouble after the fall of the Aztecs. Language barriers were another part of the Franciscan problem. These people had their own language called Nahuatl, and the Franciscans, they had to learn the language, and it took some time for them to learn it. There were some interesting things, and I forgot to make a note of the one Franciscan who was part of this Franciscan group, who he cataloged the language, their practices, their cultural things, their religious practices, and that sort of thing. And he was one of the first to ever do that in the history of the world. But nevertheless, the language was a real problem. Over time, some missionaries learned the local language and even developed written forms of these languages to aid in conversion and education. But it took time, and the initial lack of direct communication hindered the Franciscan efforts. Another problem they had was how they approached the attempt to convert. They had a problem because obviously the local people had their religious practices. They were often involved in attempts to supplant local religious practices with Christian rituals and belief, which sometimes led to resistance. The Franciscans, like other missionary groups, would often attempt to destroy local religious symbols and places of worship, replacing them with Christian churches and icons. This approach proved was perceived as an attack on indigenous culture and sometimes led to hostility and resistance rather than conversion. And Cortez actually participated in this. Cortez had a Dominican priest with him, and when they came across the very first tribe, they had a little monument, kind of a pyramid thing, where they did the sacrifices, and they had a pagan image. They removed that pagan image, thanks to the Dominican, and they replaced it, I think, with an image of either Christ or the Blessed Mother. This is the kind of thing, I mean, the Christians are coming in, they're seeing these pagan gods, they're seeing the worship and the blood and all, and they're making an effort, but it wasn't met with acceptance. They had socio-political dynamics that they had to deal with that often complicated the situation. While some indigenous groups might have been more receptive to new religious ideas, the overt connection between the missionaries and the colonial administration, which was often oppressive, made acceptance of Christianity more problematic. The turning point began to change in 1531, around 1531, with the apparition of Our Lady of Guadeloupe to Juan Diego, who is Saint Juan Diego. He was canonized. He was a native convert, and the apparition happened on the hill of Tepeyac, which is near or in Mexico City, I believe. The event became a pivotal moment in the history of Christianity in the Americas. The image of the Virgin Mary, who appeared with mestizo features and spoke Nahuatl, the indigenous language. The mestizo features are features of her look that the local people recognize as an indigenous look. And even the image that we are aware of from Our Lady of Guadeloupe, with the moon at her feet, and the image from the tilma of St. Juan Diego. When people from that part of the world see that, they see a person from their part of the world. We don't necessarily see that ourselves. We see the image. It is different in many cases from other images we're aware of from the apparitions of the Blessed Mother. The local language, the Nahuatl local language, resonated deeply with the indigenous people. It provided a culturally relatable figure that bridged the gap between the indigenous cultures and the Christian faith. A year later, in 1532, a year after the apparition, the conversions among the indigenous began to increase significantly. The image of Our Lady of Guadalupe played a crucial role in this shift, as it helped to localize Christianity in a form that was more acceptable and meaningful to the indigenous populations. The image and the story around it facilitated a more syncretic approach to Christianity, blending elements of indigenous and Christian traditions, which proved far more successful than the earlier efforts. In summary, the initial struggles of the Franciscans were largely due to cultural and linguistic barriers and their methodological approaches, but the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe marked a significant turning point in their missionary work, leading to much greater success in the following years.
Yeah, and much greater success, meaning we've seen estimated 9 to 10 million indigenous people in Mexico converted to Christianity, which after, I believe, about 14 years after the Protestant Reformation is when this apparition happened.
It took about 9 to 10 years for those 9 to 10 million, or about 10 years, for the 9 to 10 million to come back.
So just a million a year or so.
But yes, the Protestant Reformation had occurred, and of course, we don't know the number of Catholics that left the church at that point, but it's a miraculous event that all these people came in.
And our Blessed Mother kind of showing us about how we should go about converting people rather than coming in and changing everything. She came as those people, showed us how to love and meet people where they are.
Yes.
Yeah, I think our modern mindset, we often dismiss a lot of these pagan cultures and it's because we don't understand their worldview. The worldview, it's often portrayed in modern media as being very, ignorant and simplistic. Like, well, this is a nice attribute of water, so therefore it's a god, and they just sort of made gods out of everything. But there was a very intricate balance, and it was a representation of reality that was very complex, and it answered a lot of questions. It solved a lot of societal problems, but it also created a lot of problems. Anytime there's sin and immorality, you're going to have issues. But it ultimately, through this sacrifice, this scapegoat mechanism, it was able to keep the peace and allow for, in a worldly sense, flourishing empires to evolve. So it's interesting if you sort of try to enter into that, as much as we can, from being separated by time and culture. What was their reality? What was their worldview? And more importantly, like, what was their value system? So to me, listening to you speak about this, Ted, it's Our Lady of Guadeloupe, through her intimacy with the Holy Spirit and divine knowledge, was able to really capture their value system, was able to really understand their worldview, and was able to strike at a nerve and really say, like, look, I see your desires, I see what you value, what you think is going to lead to fulfillment in life, and I also see your despair and your grasping, and so she came in through this one image that was able to capture all that, and say, like, look, here's how I, as your mother, am going to fulfill those desires, to meet those needs without you having to compromise and literally sacrifice your souls and those of your kindred brothers.
Yeah, I think it's important to also take a look at what the Blessed Mother said to St. Juan Diego. And if you remember, Juan Diego had several encounters with the Blessed Mother. And one time he actually went a different direction because he was trying to avoid her appearance because his uncle was sick. And he was trying to find a priest, and he was afraid that if Our Lady showed up, that he would have to take another message to the bishop. But the Blessed Mother, of course, surprised him and appeared to him on the very path he was taking to try to circumvent her. And her words to him are words that we all need to remember as well. And they go like this. Listen, put it into your heart, my youngest and dearest son, that the thing that frightens you, the thing that afflicts you, is nothing. Do not let it disturb you. Am I not here, I who am your mother? Are you not under my shadow and protection? Am I not the source of your joy? Are you not in the hollow of my mantle, in the crossing of my arms? Do you need something more? Let nothing else worry you or disturb you.
Yeah, and I want to close with this important part of this. The apparition site and the vision itself were infused with symbols from the flower world, the Mesoamerican concept of paradise. The area around Juan Diego burst into bloom with vibrant and exotic flowers not native to the region, echoing the mythical flower world paradise, a realm filled with perpetual spring, vibrant colors, and divine harmony, reinforcing the celestial and sacred nature of the encounter. So that was the big part of it also. The language that she spoke, the look that she had that fit in with the Mesoamericans, but also the flower world itself, a prophecy that came 1,000 years before the apparition.
Wow. Well, we're out of time, but that was awesome. Ted, thank you. Remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life, fixed the past, stared at death, and it stared back, standing fast in the light of the word. A shotgun blast was the last thing I heard. I rattled in the wind like a window pane.